The woman arrived on the back of a freight wagon with 2 children, a cracked leather satchel, and a look in her eyes like she'd already decided she wasn't going to cry about whatever came next. The sun was doing what the Arizona sun does in late August, pressing down on everything like a man leaning his full weight onto a wound. The red earth cracked in long, pale seams. The scrub brush looked half dead and too stubborn to finish the job. Heat rose off the road in slow, wavering sheets, and the wagon wheels ground through the dust with a sound like a millstone working dry grain. Colette Marsh sat straight-backed on the wagon bench. One arm around the younger child, a girl of about 4 with dark braids and red-rimmed eyes, and her other hand gripping the side rail hard enough that her knuckles had gone the color of old bone. The older child, a boy of perhaps 9, sat on her opposite side with his chin set in a way that didn't belong on a child's face. His name was Samuel. He'd been practicing that chin since Kansas. The wagon rolled through the gate of the Aldridge Ranch just past noon, and the man standing in the yard wasn't what she'd expected. He was tall and wide across the shoulders, with a sun-darkened neck and quiet hands. He wore no gun on his hip, not at this hour, not on his own land. He was splitting fence posts. He'd split maybe 30 of them before they arrived, by the look of the pile. He set down the maul. He looked at Colette Marsh. He looked at the 2 children. Then he looked at the envelope in her hand, the one with the Aldridge name written across it in neat ink, the one the agency had sealed. "You bought the wrong bride," she said. Her voice was flat and clear as creek water over stone. "The woman you paid for died of fever in Dodge. They sent me instead. I understand if you want us gone." The man, whose name was Eli Aldridge, didn't speak right away. He studied her the way you study a horizon when the weather is changing, not with alarm, but with the kind of careful attention that means you're taking it seriously. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but kin to one. He held out his hand. "Eli Aldridge," he said. "You hungry? If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you." The house was a hard thing to look at when you first stepped inside. Not because it was dirty, exactly. It was the kind of disorder that comes from a man managing too much alone, from letting the small comforts go one at a time until there are none left. The curtains over the main window had come loose on one side and hung at a defeated angle, collecting dust along their hem. 3 coffee cups sat on the table in various states of abandonment, one still holding the dark ghost of its last use. A pair of work boots sat beside the door with their laces pulled out and dried mud still pressed into the creases. Books were stacked on the floor near the cold hearth. A child's wooden horse sat on the mantel next to a folded piece of paper that no one had moved in what looked like a considerable time. Colette took all of this in quietly, in the span of the few seconds it took to cross the threshold. She set the satchel down near the door and did not say a word about any of it. "You can have the room at the back," Eli said. "I'll sleep in the barn until," he stopped. Started again. "Until we figure what to figure. I'll need to know where you keep your flour," Colette said. He blinked. "Beg pardon?" "Flour. And salt. Do you have lard or do you use drippings?" He looked at her a moment longer than was strictly comfortable. "Cabinet left of the stove. There's a tin of lard behind the cornmeal. Might be some salt pork in the cellar." She had already moved toward the kitchen before he finished speaking. The children stood in the center of the main room. The little girl, her name was Wren, and she had said nothing since Dodge City, held the hem of Colette's skirt until the skirt moved too far away. Then she stood with her arms at her sides and looked up at the ceiling, which had a long water stain across one beam shaped roughly like a river. Eli crouched down to her level. He was not a man practiced at crouching to children's levels. He did it carefully, like a man lowering himself into cold water. "You see that stain up there?" he said. Wren looked at him instead of the ceiling. "Looks like the Gila River," he said. I used to think it looked like a snake, but one day I decided it was a river and it's been a river ever since. You can decide it's whatever you want. This house belongs to whoever's in it. Wren stared at him. Then she looked at the stain. It looks like a bird, she said. Her voice was barely a thing at all. Then that's what it is, he said. Samuel, standing to one side, watched this exchange with his practiced chin. But something behind his eyes had shifted slightly, the way a door shifts when someone puts their weight against it from the other side without opening it. In the kitchen, Colette worked. She found the flour and the lard and a half-wheel of hard cheese wrapped in cloth that was still good at its center. There were dried beans in a clay pot and 3 onions hanging from a cord by the window and a long-handled skillet with good seasoning on it that told her someone had once cooked seriously in this house. She found wild sage dried and bundled in a tin, not a ranch hand's doing that. Someone with intention had put that sage there. She started the beans first, knowing they needed time. She rendered the lard down in the skillet and cut the onions fine, not quick, but steady, her eyes gone to that middle distance that cooking sometimes provides. Where the hands know their work and the mind is permitted to be somewhere else entirely. She let herself be somewhere else for just a moment. Then she came back. She made a skillet bread with the flour and lard and a pinch of salt, patting the dough out flat and covering the skillet. Letting it cook low and slow with the lid on so the heat pressed down from above like an oven. She found a jar of dark preserves on a shelf, plum, maybe, or wild grape, and opened it and smelled it and deemed it good. By the time the bread was done, the beans had swelled and softened in their pot with the salt pork from the cellar and the sage and half of 1 onion. The smell changed the whole house. It moved through the rooms like something living. Eli came in from checking the horses and stopped at the kitchen doorway. The table had been cleared. The 3 abandoned cups were gone, washed, sitting mouth down on the shelf. The curtain had been straightened and repinned with what appeared to be a spare nail she'd found on the windowsill. The wooden horse from the mantel had been moved to the side table nearest the door where a child might reach it. He didn't say anything about any of that. He washed his hands at the basin. They sat at the table, the 4 of them, Eli at the head, Colette across, Samuel and Wren between them on the bench. No one said grace. No one suggested it. Eli served the beans and Colette cut the bread into quarters and set the preserves in the center of the table like it was always going to be there. Wren ate with both hands wrapped around her bowl like she was afraid someone might take it. Samuel ate with one eye on Eli the entire time, studying him the way small animals study large ones, not in fear, exactly, but in the careful calculation of threat and intent. Eli ate without looking at either of them. He chewed slowly and deliberately. He refilled the children's bowls before they asked. When Samuel reached for the bread and the preserves, Eli slid both closer to the boy's side of the table without comment. "Bread's good," Eli said. "It's plain bread," Colette said. "Best kind," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at his bowl. She looked back at hers. Outside, the Arizona evening was beginning its long, slow negotiation with the heat, the light going from white to gold to something deeper, the color of hammered brass laid over red clay. The scrub jays had come out and were arguing in the mesquite. Somewhere out past the fence line, a coyote tested its voice against the coming dark. Inside, 4 people ate a plain meal at a clean table, and it was the most ordinary, improbable thing in the world. 3 days passed before Samuel spoke to Eli directly. The boy was up before dawn, which Eli noticed the first morning and chose not to comment on. There are children who rise early because they've been afraid to sleep late, and you don't make a ceremony out of that. You simply let them find their feet. On the 4th morning, Eli was in the yard repairing a section of the east fence where a post had rotted through at the base. He'd pulled the old post and was tamping the new one into the hole when Samuel appeared at his elbow with a spare tamping rod, too heavy for the boy, clearly. But he was holding it with both hands and offering it like a thing of value. "So you needed one," Samuel said. Eli looked at the rod. He looked at the boy. "I do," he said. He took the rod. "You any good at holding line?" What line? Fence line. I need someone to hold the wire taut while I set the staples or the whole thing hangs crooked. I can do that, Samuel said. Gloves on that post yonder. They'll be big, but wrap the wire twice around your palm before you grip it. They worked through the morning in the growing heat, moving down the fence line post by post. Eli did not talk except when the work required it. Samuel did not talk at all, but he listened carefully to every instruction, and he didn't complain when the wire bit through the gloves and left a red mark across his palm. He showed Eli the mark during a water break, not for sympathy but in the manner of a man showing another man a fair wound taken during honest work. Eli looked at it. He went to the saddlebag on his horse and came back with a strip of clean cloth and wound it around the boy's hand without making it into a lesson or a story. Keep the gloves on, he said. Yes, sir, Samuel said. And that was that. Inside the house, Colette and Wren had found their own rhythm. Wren followed her mother through every room like a small shadow, helping where her 4-year-old hands could help and sitting quietly where they couldn't. Colette had found a broom and worked through the house from back to front, beating the rugs over the porch rail until the dust came off them in great red clouds. She'd fixed the broken latch on the back window with a bent nail she'd straightened against the hearthstone. She'd pulled the water stain from the floorboards near the pump with a paste of wood ash and water, and she'd rearranged the kitchen to make sense, things you use daily within reach. Things you use rarely on the high shelf. She did all of this without being asked and without announcing it. When Eli came in for the midday meal and saw the rugs back on the floor and the window latch working, he ran his thumb over the latch once, testing it. Then he went and washed up. What was thawing between them was not dramatic. It was the kind of warmth that comes from two people agreeing, without words and without ceremony, that the work in front of them matters and that they are both willing to do it. But 40 miles east, in the town of Creed Crossing, a man named Gideon Marsh was asking questions about his wife. He was not asking gently. Gideon Marsh was a compact, handsome man with a way of smiling that never reached above his cheekbones and hands that were always slightly too still, the hands of a man who had learned early that stillness frightens people more than motion. He'd been in Creed Crossing for 2 days, working his way through the saloon and the dry goods and the barber shop with the patience of someone who knows exactly how to read a room and how long to let silence do its work before he spoke into it. He told the barber he was looking for his wife, wandered off, he said, with a sorrow so practiced it would have convinced anyone who hadn't looked closely at his eyes. His wife and his children, he said. Taken by grief, maybe. She'd lost her mind a little since the last baby. He was worried. He just wanted to bring them home safe. The barber sympathized. The barber's wife sympathized and told 2 other women, who carried the story to the general store. By the time the story reached the edge of town it had grown a little, as stories do. The wife was said to be unwell, possibly dangerous to herself. The children needed their father. The man was broken-hearted. None of them had seen Colette Marsh or her name written down anywhere. But Creed Crossing was 40 miles east of Sable Flat, and Sable Flat was where the nearest agency operated, and Gideon Marsh was a man who followed lines of logic with the slow, relentless patience of water finding low ground. He ordered a whiskey and sat back in his chair and watched the road. Sable Flat was not much of a town, but it had opinions. It had a dry goods store owned by a widow named Mrs. Orne who kept the accounts in a ledger with a locked cover and kept the town's moral ledger in her head with equal precision. It had a land office, a feed store, a single-room schoolhouse, a saloon that called itself the Copper Bell, and a church that held services every second and fourth Sunday under a preacher who smelled like cedar and spoke like he was always slightly disappointed in his congregation. Eli brought Colette and the children into town on the 9th day. They needed flour, lamp oil, and wire staples, and the children needed to be seen in the schoolhouse before the fall term started so that Samuel could be enrolled. They came in the wagon, Eli driving and Colette beside him on the bench with Wren in her lap. Samuel sat in the wagon bed with his legs hanging off the back the way boys do when they've been given the freedom to do so. The town did not stop. But it slowed. Mrs. Orne was on her porch when the wagon rolled past, turning a bolt of cloth in her hands for no particular reason, and her eyes followed the wagon the way a compass needle follows north. She said nothing. She went inside her store. Eli helped Colette down from the wagon in front of the dry goods. He did not offer his hand like he was performing it. He simply held it out and she took it and stepped down, and that was a small thing that Mrs. Orne, standing now behind her window, catalogued with great care. Inside the store, Eli ordered his supplies while Colette moved along the shelves with Wren on her hip. She found a tin of horehound candies and put them back. She found a bolt of blue calico and did not touch it. She was pricing things without appearing to. Mrs. Orne emerged from the back room. "Mr. Aldridge," she said. Her voice was the kind of pleasant that is made of something harder underneath, like a wood floor with stone beneath it. "I don't believe I've met your," a pause like a held breath. "Company." "Colette Marsh," Colette said, before Eli could speak. "And my children, Samuel and Wren." She said it plainly and without apology and held Mrs. Orne's gaze with the calmness of a woman who has survived worse introductions. "Marsh," Mrs. Orne said. "You've come a long way." "From Dodge," Colette said. "And you're staying at the Aldridge place?" "We are." The pause that followed was a particular species of silence that small-town women have been cultivating for a very long time, the kind that is not really silence at all, but a shaped absence of words that says everything they've decided not to say out loud. "I see," Mrs. Orne said. Eli set his hands flat on the counter. He did it quietly, but Mrs. Orne looked at those hands the way you look at a storm coming over a flat country when there's nothing between you and it. "She'll be needing a separate order put on account," he said. "Household supplies. Whatever she needs." He looked at Colette. "You make the list." Colette took the pencil from the counter without being invited to do so and began writing on the back of the supply slip. She wrote slowly and clearly, adding items as she thought of them: candles, bluing for the laundry, a cake of good soap, 2 spools of heavy thread. Lamp oil separate from Eli's order, so it was her own. She passed the list to Mrs. Orne and looked at her without blinking. "I'd appreciate credit until the month's end," Colette said. "I'll be taking in mending. I can do fine work, buttonholes, alterations, repair. If you know anyone in town who needs it." Mrs. Orne looked at the list. Then at Colette. "I might know 1 or 2, she said, and something in the hardness of her voice shifted by a fraction. "Not much. But enough to notice." The trouble came from another quarter. A man named Harlan Duke owned the feed store and 200 acres on the north side of the valley that bordered Eli's land along a creek that had been the subject of a water rights dispute going back 3 years. He was a lean, leather-faced man with a grievance he kept polished. When Eli came out of the dry goods store and walked across to settle his account at the feed store, Duke was leaning against the post out front, watching the wagon where Colette sat waiting. "Heard you got yourself a houseguest," Duke said. "Not your business, Harlan." "Town talks," Duke said. He pushed himself off the post. "Woman like that, no proper arrangement." "There's a proper arrangement," Eli said. He stopped walking and turned to face Duke with the kind of stillness that has nothing theatrical in it, just the simple, flat fact of a man who has decided where he stands and isn't moving. "I'd advise you to think carefully about the rest of that sentence before you finish it." Duke looked at him. Duke looked at the wagon. Duke's jaw worked like he was chewing something that had gone bitter. "Just saying what people will say," Duke offered. "People can say what they like," Eli said. "But they'll say it somewhere I can't hear it, or there's going to be a conversation neither of us walks away from in a good mood." He held Duke's gaze for 1 beat longer. "We clear?" Duke nodded. "Just once." He went inside his store. Eli walked back to the wagon. He climbed up beside Colette. "Trouble," she said. "Nothing that won't keep," he said, and took up the reins. She looked at the side of his face for a long moment. He was looking at the road ahead, his jaw set the way the land was set, without apology, without ornamentation. "Thank you," she said. Very quiet. Almost not there at all. "Nothing to thank me for," he said. But she'd heard something in the silence after. She let it be. He came in the third week, past midnight, on a moonless night when the stars were out in force over the Arizona dark like a spillage of cold fire across black cloth. Colette woke first. She woke the way she had learned to wake, not with a gasp or a lurch, but in one clean, silent motion from sleep to sitting, every nerve already listening before she'd chosen to be conscious of it. This was not a skill she'd wanted to develop. There was a sound from the yard. Not the sound of coyotes or horses or the particular complaint of the windmill when the wind shifted. It was a boot on dry ground, placed carefully, which is the loudest possible sound to a woman who has spent time listening for exactly that. She was out of the bed and across the floor in her bare feet before she'd completed the thought. She went to the children's room first. Samuel was awake, sitting up straight, his chin set. Wren was still asleep, one arm flung over her face. "Stay," Colette said to Samuel. "One word." He nodded. She moved through the dark house to the front door, not opening it, standing beside it, her back to the wall. Her hand closing around the handle of the kitchen knife she'd taken off the table 2 nights ago and left on the shelf by the door for reasons she hadn't examined until now. Down the hall, she heard Eli's door. A single quiet sound. Then nothing. A moment later he was beside her in the darkness, and she didn't know how he'd moved that quietly on floorboards she'd mapped completely in her own travels through the house. He had the rifle. He looked at her, just a look, dark to dark, and there was something passing between them that had no name because it didn't need one. 2 people in the dark, taking the same position on the same side of a problem. He went out the back. She stayed at the front. She heard him on the porch, one creak, and then nothing again. The yard was a field of black shapes, the wagon, the fence posts, the water trough, the mesquite along the south edge. The windmill turned slowly against the stars without purpose. Then a voice, low and conversational, from the direction of the barn. "Colette." Just her name. Just that. Said the way a man says a word he owns. She pressed flat against the wall beside the door and did not breathe. "I know you're in there," Gideon Marsh said. There was a sound of movement. He wasn't trying to be silent now. "Come on out and we'll talk reasonable. Nobody needs to be uncomfortable." The night held. Then Eli's voice came from the other side of the yard, steady and low and carrying exactly the distance it needed to carry. "I'll ask you once to state your business and once only." A pause. "I'm here for my wife and children," Gideon said. The charm was still in it, barely. "No quarrel with you, friend." "Then you're at the wrong property," Eli said. "There's no one here by that description. There's a woman in that house who came through a legal agency with documentation, and 2 children who are under the protection of this ranch. You'll want to move on." "That's real interesting," Gideon said. He had moved again. Colette could track him by the sounds. He was working toward the front, not the barn. But the law's going to say otherwise. A man has rights to his family. The law, Eli said, will be called for when the sun is up and you're standing in front of it with whatever documents you claim to have. Tonight you're trespassing and I am within every right given to me by the territory of Arizona to address that directly. There was the sound of a hammer being drawn back. Single, clean, unambiguous. The yard went absolutely still. Gideon Marsh was a man who understood the grammar of violence. He'd written enough sentences in it, and he recognized when someone else was speaking it fluently. The rifle was not a threat made in anger. It was a statement made in the same tone as a deed or a contract, and he'd heard enough of those to know when a man meant what he said. "I'll come back," Gideon said. "Come back in daylight," Eli said. "Come back with a badge or come back with a lawyer. But if you come back in the dark again, I'll treat it accordingly." The sound of boots moving across dry ground. A horse somewhere past the tree line, already saddled and waiting, because Gideon Marsh had never done anything without a plan to leave it. Then silence. Colette opened the front door. Eli was standing in the yard with the rifle low at his side. He was looking at the tree line. His face was unreadable in the starlight, not because there was nothing there, but because whatever was there was being held very carefully in its place. She came to stand beside him. "He'll do what he said," she said. "I know. He's got a paper somewhere. He always has a paper." "Then we'll need a better paper," Eli said. He turned to look at her. In the dark his eyes were very calm. Not the calm of a man who doesn't feel the weight of things, but the calm of a man who has felt it already and decided to stand under it anyway. "You and those children safe is the only fact that concerns me right now. We'll work the rest out in the morning." She looked at him for a long time, this man she'd known for 3 weeks, standing in the yard of his ranch in the middle of the Arizona night. Having just put his body and his land and his standing between her and the thing she'd traveled 1,000 miles to escape. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, and this was not the moment for it. "All right," she said. They went back inside, and she sat with Samuel until the boy's practiced chin softened into sleep. And she listened to the sound of Eli's boots on the porch as he kept watch until the grey false dawn came in from the east and the coyotes went quiet and the first bird started up in the mesquite. She made coffee when the light was enough to see by, and she set his cup on the porch rail without saying anything, and he drank it without turning around, and that was its own kind of conversation. The morning after, Eli hitched the wagon before the heat had fully committed to the day and drove alone into Sable Flat to see Judge Reed Calloway, who held the county's legal wait every Tuesday in the back room of the land office. Calloway was a wide, slow-moving man with a full white beard and the eyes of someone who has been lied to so many times he's stopped being offended by it and simply gotten better at recognizing it. He had known Eli Aldridge for 11 years, had witnessed the deed on this land, and had buried Eli's wife, a woman named Clara, who had died in the winter 2 years past from a fever that came on fast and was not amenable to argument. Eli sat across from him and laid out the situation in plain language, without embellishment and without appeal. He described Colette's arrival, the agency papers, the children, the night visit. He described what he'd seen in Colette's eyes on the first day, and not with those words, but with the words of a man who has learned to read weather and land, and this was the same skill applied to a human being. "I want to know what paper can beat his paper," Eli said. Calloway looked at him for a long time. "What are you asking me exactly, Eli?" "I'm asking you what I'd need to do to make it so that a husband's claim on a woman who left him with cause, children in tow, who were in danger, is legally overridden by something stronger." "You thinking about the deed?" Calloway said. "I'm thinking about more than the deed." Calloway sat back. He touched the edge of his beard. He looked at the ceiling. He was not a man who gave legal opinions hastily, but he was also not a man who confused law with justice and therefore was sometimes willing to help a man find the place where the two agreed. "Territorial law's clear enough that a man has claim on a wife and the children of the marriage," Calloway said slowly. "But there are exceptions carved out: abandonment, cruelty of a sufficient nature, endangerment of minors. Hard to prove without witnesses, and she'd have been the one providing testimony." "She'll provide it," Eli said. "Takes time. Takes a circuit judge, not just me." "How much time?" "Weeks. Maybe more." "What covers her in the between?" Calloway looked at him. "A legal marriage would create a new contract that complicates his claim considerably," Calloway said. "If she's a wife, your wife, the question of another man's jurisdiction over her gets considerably murkier. The children, if you formally acknowledge them, tell me what I need to bring you," Eli said. The judge set down his pen. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the man across from him with the kind of attention he reserved for things he wanted to remember. "You'd need her consent," Calloway said. "Freely given." "And your own?" "Mine's not the question," Eli said. He drove back to the ranch at a steady pace, the wagon wheels turning in the red dust, the sun already pressing hard on everything, the mesquite throwing short, serious shadows in the mid-morning light. He had a particular kind of quietness in him, not the quietness of uncertainty, but of a man who has made a decision in a place where decisions stick and is now simply waiting to speak it. Colette was in the yard when he pulled through the gate, hanging the clean washing on the line she'd strung between two fence posts. She'd made a line of practical shirts and work trousers and two small dresses belonging to Wren. And she was pinning them with the focused economy of a woman who does the work in front of her without wasting emotion. He climbed down from the wagon. He stood a few feet away and waited until she'd finished with the pin in her hand. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. She turned to face him. She was wearing her plain dress and her hair was pinned up and she had a red crease on her right hand from the washing, and she looked like every woman who has ever worked an honest morning. And she was watching him with clear, careful eyes. He told her what Calloway had said. He told her plainly, without dressing it in anything it wasn't. He told her that he understood it was an extraordinary thing to ask, that he was not asking it in any spirit of ownership or advantage. That the house was hers and the children were welcome in it regardless of her answer. He told her it was a practical solution to a problem that was coming at them with the patience of water and the cruelty of a man who'd never been told no by anything he couldn't outlast. He told her that he thought, if she wanted to know, he thought it was not the worst possible thing, the two of them, in time. That he was not a man given to performances of feeling, but that he was steady, and the land was good, and he was not Gideon Marsh and would never be. He stopped talking. The washing moved in the warm breeze against the impossibly blue sky. Colette looked at the ground for a moment. Then at the house. Then at him. "I'll need to think on it," she said. "Take what time you need," he said. "I'll need tonight," she said. "That's fair," he said. She thought on it that evening while she made the supper and while she helped Wren wash for bed and while she listened to Samuel read aloud from the geography book Eli had put on the shelf at a boys' eye level without comment. She thought on it in the way you think on the things that matter, not in a straight line but in circles, returning again and again to the same center, which was this. She was 31 years old and she had 2 children and she had gotten herself and those children out of a situation that would have swallowed all 3 of them. And she was standing in a clean house in Arizona that smelled like sage and honest work, and the man who lived in it had stood in the dark between her and the worst of what she knew. She thought about Clara's name, which she'd found once on the inside of a book cover in the small handwriting of a woman who'd loved something. She thought about the wooden horse on the mantel that Eli had never moved. She thought about the heel of the bread, which he always left on Samuel's plate without looking like he was doing it on purpose. In the morning, she found him splitting wood before the sun was fully up. "Yes," she said. He set down the maul. He turned to look at her. "You're certain?" he said. "I'm certain," she said. They were married in Calloway's back room on a Thursday in early September, with Samuel and Wren as witnesses, Samuel standing with his chin held at a new angle, not the practiced hardness of before, but something more like the straightness of a young tree finding its direction. Wren wore a ribbon in her braids that Colette had bought with the first money she'd earned from mending for Mrs. Orne. Calloway read the words in his slow, careful voice. Eli signed. Colette signed. Eli put a hand on Samuel's shoulder on the way out, briefly, the way men do when they mean more than touch, and the boy did not pull away. Gideon Marsh arrived in Sable Flat 4 days later. He arrived with a swagger and a document from a county clerk in Kansas, a marriage certificate. As expected, and he went directly to the land office and asked for Calloway and laid his paper on the desk. Calloway looked at it without hurry. Then Calloway laid a second paper beside it, the Aldridge marriage certificate, filed and witnessed and legal, and a third paper, which was a formal petition for dissolution of the prior marriage on grounds of abandonment and documented cruelty, already submitted to the circuit court at Tucson with 2 affidavits attached. One from Colette Aldridge, née Marsh, and one from a woman in Dodge City who had been Colette's neighbor for 2 years and had seen enough to say so plainly. Gideon looked at the papers. "This won't stand," he said. "You're welcome to argue it in Tucson," Calloway said, in front of Judge Hale, who has heard 3 similar cases in the last 2 years and has ruled the same direction every time. The circuit date is October 15th. I'd get yourself a good lawyer. Gideon Marsh looked at Calloway with the kind of eyes that made most men take a step back. Calloway had been looked at by worse and hadn't moved then, either. Gideon left without a word. The town, which had been watching, because towns watch, registered his departure. Duke saw him go from the feed store doorway. Mrs. Orne saw him from her window. The barber, who had given him a shave 2 days prior, saw him ride out on the eastern road without looking back. That evening, Mrs. Orne came to the Copper Bell, which surprised everyone. Since she hadn't been seen in the saloon in living memory, and she ordered nothing and simply announced to the room at large that she was putting out a notice for Colette Aldridge's mending service. As the woman did exceptional buttonhole work and was currently accepting orders through the dry goods store. It was not an apology. But it was what it was. Back at the ranch, Eli and Colette sat on the porch after the children were in bed. The evening had turned the sky above the mesa the color of dark plums bleeding into charcoal. The air had begun its nightly negotiation with the heat, and the cooling came in slow and gentle from the west, carrying the smell of the creosote and the distant suggestion of rain 2 ranges away. Eli said nothing for a long time. Colette was mending by the last of the daylight, her needle moving in and out of the cloth with the quiet persistence of something that means to finish what it started. Wren asked me today what she should call me, Eli said. Colette's needle paused. What did you tell her? Told her that was entirely her decision and that she could take as long as she liked. She looked at the side of his face. The light was the color of embers. And it caught the lines around his eyes and the grey coming in at his temples and the general suggestion of a man who has been weathered by things both external and internal and is still standing. She'll decide soon, Colette said. She decides things quickly once she's made up her mind. She does, he agreed. They sat in the cooling evening, the mending in her hands and the darkness coming in easy from the east. And the ranch was quiet around them in the way that land is quiet when it has been worked honestly and put to rest. There is a particular kind of healing that does not announce itself. It does not come in a single moment, in a rush of revelation or a sunrise that changes everything. It comes the way spring comes to a drought-cracked country, slowly, in increments almost too small to notice, a green thing here, a softening there. Until one morning you look out and the land you thought was ruined is something else entirely. Colette Aldridge had arrived at a broken ranch in a broken state, carrying 2 children and every reason in the world to stop trusting anything that looked like a future. Eli Aldridge had been living in the particular silence of a man who has lost his center and forgotten how to look for it. What grew between them was not poetry. It was not declared. It was work, and meals, and a straightened curtain, and a fence line held taut, and a rifle lifted in the dark without hesitation. It was a child deciding what to call a man. It was a man learning to crouch down to a child's level and let her rename the water stain on the ceiling beam into whatever she needed it to be. Broken places do not disappear. They become part of the architecture. They become what the new walls are built around, and if the building is done with care, with honesty, with the stubborn patience of people who choose to stay, the structure that results is stronger than anything that never broke at all. The land in that part of Arizona does not forgive the sun. But it grows back, every time, from the roots. So did they.